So I need to make something for dinner tonight. My husband and I are gonna be out and we have Nana coming to watch the kids, so I want something that was easy. I decided on soup. I have leftover chicken from a roast chicken the other night, actually quite a lot of it. I also have a bunch of leftover gravy that I made from the chicken. So I'm gonna use the gravy as the soup base and then add, we'll see if I have to add any more stock to it, but you guys can just kind of see how I make a pot of soup. I took all this meat, I had a chicken, it's all thawed, and I just used my hands and just peeled all of the meat off. I took the skin off, and then I'll throw all that stuff into a big garbage bag and stick it in my freezer for the next time I make stock. I'm just gonna rough chop it. I personally do not like humongous chunks of meat in my soup. My husband does, the kids don't. So I usually chop up the meat fairly good. Now, the longer it simmers in broth, the more it'll kind of naturally start to break apart just because it's getting cooked. Okay, so we have chicken here. I'm just gonna set this aside. We are gonna chop up some onion. Onion and butter is the first step to most good cooked dishes. I've got a little chunk of butter. I'm just gonna pop that in my pot. If you do not use butter and you are dairy free or don't want fat, you can use pretty much any oil for frying. Now I know lots of families, their kids do not like onions, as in will not eat something if they see a piece of onion in it. So if that's a battle in your household, a really easy way to put onions in something and get good flavor is to puree them in a food processor or grate them. I've done that for meatballs and stuff, where I've actually grated the onion. Note though that all of those oils and juices that make your eyes water come out tenfold when you grate onions, so just a heads up. Carrots. Actually don't have any celery, not a big deal. Some of the staple things that I always try to have in my house are carrots, celery, potatoes, sweet potatoes or yams, onions. So I'm just letting the vegetables, the onions cook down on like a medium-high heat. If you were making a soup and you wanted to add garlic or something, now would be the time to do it, right when you're frying the onions and the butter. Once the onions have started to soften up, then that's where you'd add your either fresh minced garlic or minced garlic that's already in oil. I keep a big jar of store-bought minced garlic in the fridge just for quick. Also, just in case you didn't know what the end of your peeler is for, at the end of a peeler there's like a little pointed piece. If you have a bad spot on your potato, you stick it in there and it literally pulls out a little potato plug, just in case you've ever wondered. I usually figure that the onions take about as long as it takes to peel your extra vegetables, and now they are looking pretty good. Everything's softened up. Onions have softened up. I am going to add a little bit of water. I'm just going to add enough water to basically keep anything from burning on the bottom. So that's like a quarter cup, maybe a half a cup. Okay, chop over potatoes. Now once again, you can add whatever vegetables you want. Typically I add celery as well, and I usually add some sweet potatoes too. I don't have either because I haven't been grocery shopping lately. Slash, I didn't actually look when I went grocery shopping last time what I was out of, so it's more that I forgot. Again, I like smaller pieces of stuff. I tend to chop up my vegetables into smaller pieces, cubes. But you can totally cut bigger chunks if that is your preference. All right, now I have like 4 cups of gravy here that I made with the chicken, with the intention of us having chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy, but my husband had a busy work week, so we didn't use the gravy. So it's just sitting here, it's been in the fridge. This gravy is what I'm gonna use for my soup base. My biggest advice is never throw gravy away. I always freeze the extra because gravy can be used as a base for so many different things, primarily soup. We eat a lot of soup in the wintertime, and it just, I mean, it saves money because you're not having to buy a gravy package every time you want to make soup or every time you need gravy. So I always freeze my gravy, and then I use it in, you know, shepherd's pie or turkey pot pies, biscuits and gravy. It's really easy to take a small amount of gravy and stretch it by adding some extra ingredients and take that little bit and turn it into a lot. We're gonna let that come up to a boil. Once it's come up to temperature a little bit, I'll taste it, and then we'll see if we need to add anything else. Once it's all come up to temperature, then I'm gonna add about a cup of rice to it as well. So this is gonna be a pretty basic soup. At this point, I can add my turkey. Chicken, not turkey. So I've got chicken, potatoes, carrots, onions. That's pretty basic. But just because it's basic doesn't mean that it needs to be bland. Soup's been cooking for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, and it's starting to warm up a little bit. I've given it a taste, and it just needs a little bit more flavor to it. Main reason being, the soup looks like it's a pretty good consistency right now, like a good soup consistency. The problem is once I put the rice in, the rice is gonna absorb a lot of the liquid. We need to make sure when we put rice in that we add enough of something, enough extra liquid to compensate, because that rice is gonna absorb 2 times its liquid. So to put a cup of rice in, you need to put at least 2 cups of extra water, probably more, especially if the soup's gonna sit for a while. So I'm gonna add a cup of rice, and just shy of a cup of rice. Soup, dry. Now I'm going to add 3 cups of water. Now, obviously the soup is getting watered down, which means the flavor gets watered down, right? So what I'm going to do is add some extra seasoning. Now, whenever I do stuff with turkey, my favorite combination is sage. So I have some ground sage here, you can use whole. Sage, rosemary, and thyme. So sage looks like this. This is actually from my garden. I grew sage last year and then dried it. This is what normal sage looks like. You can get a ground version of it that just makes it a little bit more potent. So I do have ground sage as well, and that's actually what I'm going to use. Thyme. Looks like this. And rosemary. Looks like this. So these are my 3 favorite things to put in stuff that's poultry. You can also add some bay leaves. Typically what you do is you buy whole leaves and you put them in your soup, and then you can remove the leaves before you actually eat the soup if you don't want leaf chunks in there. I am going to add, this is where my no measuring comes in. I start with about probably 2 teaspoons worth of each, about a teaspoon worth of each spice. put it in, mix it all up, let it sit and heat through for, you know, 10-15 minutes, and then taste it. And think, okay, that doesn't have enough of this, it doesn't have enough of that. I know it's hard if they're new spices for you, but if you smell a spice, you can get a kind of a good idea of what it tastes like. So, rosemary. I'm gonna stick a bay leaf, 2 bay leaves in. Thyme. The ground sage is way more potent than regular, so I'm just gonna do about a half a teaspoon. I'm gonna add some garlic powder. Again, about half a teaspoon. We've added some extra seasonings to compensate for the fact that we just added extra water, right? Give that a good mix, and now we're just gonna let it come up to a boil, and then once it comes to a boil, then we're gonna drop the temperature down so it can simmer. Okay, so the soup has been cooking for about an hour and a half. You could easily make this process go faster. I brought it up to a boil, and then I turned it right down to low, so like a 2-3 to let it simmer and let everything soften up. So that was about an hour and a half. The potatoes are nice and soft. You can see that they break apart really easy with a spoon, so you get nice. And the carrots, same thing. Carrots are nice and soft. You can break them apart with a spoon. So I've tasted the soup, and it tastes pretty good. The only thing it needs is a bit of salt. I don't recommend adding too much salt until kind of the end. Onto your hand, and then just, I personally like salt. And a lot of people are like, well, why would you put salt in something that you don't want to be salty? You know, like baking and stuff. But salt brings out the existing flavors. So even if you don't want something to be salty, adding a little bit of salt just helps bring out the flavors that are already in there. It is amazing what taking something that tastes a little bit bland but already has a bunch of seasoning, how much it can change by just adding, you know, half a teaspoon or a teaspoon of salt. So add a little bit of salt, you know, let it cook for a little bit longer, taste it and see where it's at. You can see the rice is all nice and cooked. We've got a nice thick consistency, so that was even with the extra water that I added. So the soup was really thin when I added the rice, but rice absorbs so much liquid. So you can see now we've got a nice kind of stew type texture to the soup with the rice. That thickens it up there. So now what I'm gonna do with this, because it's only 3:30 and everybody's not gonna eat till about 6, but I had time this morning to get this done. I'm actually gonna chuck all of this into a crock pot and just put it on keep warm, or put it on lowest setting, and just let it stay in there now until it's time for the kids to eat. So if you know you've got time during the day, making soup or something like a sauce or something ahead of time, just put it into a crock pot and put the setting on low. It's already cooked, or if you've got keep warm setting on your crock pot, mine does, and then I just stick it in there and let it sit until it's time to eat. So that is soup with no recipe. That is soup with just using things that you have left over in your house. This guy has just chicken, potatoes, carrots, rice, leftover gravy, and some extra seasoning and water, and that's it.